Hi, I'm Rick. Welcome to the Campfire. I'm glad you're going to spend some time with me. Before I tell you the story, let's take a few minutes to relax and settle in. I want you to close your eyes. Give yourself permission right now to let go of everything else you're concerned with. There's nowhere else you need to be. There's nothing else you need to be doing. Give your mind permission right now to wind down and rest. Take a deep breath in through your nose, filling your lungs with air. Hold it. Slowly exhale through your mouth. Take another deep breath in, and as you exhale, release any tension in your body. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a forest. The sun has set, and now it's nighttime. The air is cool and crisp, and the only light comes from the stars twinkling in the sky above you. As you step into the forest, you can hear the sounds of nature all around you. Listen to the rustling of the leaves in the wind, the chirping of the crickets, the occasional hooting of an owl. As you make your way deeper into the forest, you see a campfire flickering in the distance. You walk towards it. You take a seat by the fire and feel the warmth of the flame on your face. Take a moment to focus on the fire. Watch the flames dance and flicker, casting shadows on the ground all around you. As you watch the fire, allow your body to relax even further, feeling the warmth of the flames soothing your muscles and your mind. Now take a deep breath in and smell the aroma of the burning wood. Feel the gentle breeze on your skin as it carries the scent of the forest to you. As you sit by the fire, keep taking deep breaths and feel the calmness of the forest surround you. Let your mind wander, imagining the beauty of the forest at night. Allow yourself to feel at peace with your surroundings, feeling grateful for the tranquility that surrounds you. Let's start our story. John Irwin had been after Ivy Summers for 15 years. He started courting her when she was 20 and he was 25. Now that John was 40 and Ivy, who lived in a village where everyone knew everyone else's age, had to admit to being 35. The courtship didn't seem to be any closer to conclusion than it did when it started. But poor John, this wasn't his fault. He asked Ivy to marry him at the end of the first year, but she said no. John was upset, but he kept his cool and kept courting Ivy. He went to Edward Summers' house every Saturday night and spent the evening there. He walked Ivy home from prayer meetings, singing school, and parties when she would let him. He also asked her to all the concerts, socials, and frolics that happened. Ivy would never leave, but John was always willing to give her the chance. Old Edward was more in favor of John's suit, since Ivy was the plainest of his many daughters, and no one else seemed to want to stop John. But Ivy went her own way with true Summers determination, and things were left to time or chance. 3 years later, John tried again, and the same thing happened. After that, he asked Ivy to marry him every year, and every year, Ivy said no a little more abruptly and firmly than the year before. Now that they had been dating for 15 years, John didn't mind at all. He knew that a patient man would get everything he wanted. Ivy and John and the history of Deep Meadows had not stopped in time, but neither had time. At the Summers farm, there had been many and clear changes. Every year or two, one of the old Summers daughters was the bride at the wedding in the big brick farmhouse. All of the Summers girls were married and gone: Julia, Grace, Celia, Betty, Sarah, and Lucy. But Ivy had never been with anyone else. She said that every big family had to have an old maid, and she wasn't going to marry John Irwin just to have Mrs. on her gravestone. Both old Edward and his wife were buried in Deep Meadows Cemetery. The Summers acres, which were large and full of crops, were given to Ivy. She was good at running a business, and the farm stayed the best in the area. She had hired 2 men and a servant girl to work for her, and her oldest sister's 16-year-old daughter also lived with her. John dropped in every Saturday night and talked to Ivy about her stock and gave her advice about how to rotate her crops and her orchards. There weren't many visitors at the Summers place anymore, but John was always there. At 10 o'clock, he would take his hat and cane, tell Ivy to be good to herself, and go home. Ivy stopped trying to stop him a long time ago. She even let him touch her now, which she used to refuse. He always walked her home from evening meetings, and at parties, he played games with her. Young people had a great time. In Deep Meadows, the phrase "Old John and Ivy" was a running joke. But the older people stopped thinking anything would happen. Ivy laughed at John like she always had, and she would have never admitted that she might have missed him. She agreed that John was helpful and a good friend, and she would have liked him just fine if he hadn't insisted on proposing to her every year. When Ivy turned him down again, it was John's 40th birthday. As he walked down the road in the moonlight, he realized this, and doubt and worry started to creep into his heart. He and Ivy were both getting older. That was a fact that couldn't be argued. If he was ever going to get along with her, now was the time. John was a normal person who always took things in stride, but he didn't want his 15 years of patient courtship to be for nothing. He thought Ivy would get tired of saying no at some point and say yes, even if it was just to try something different. But getting tired didn't seem to be in the Summers' blood. She had said no that night with the same coolness, certainty, and lack of emotion as she had 15 years earlier. John felt like he was going around and around in circles and not getting anywhere. He decided that something had to be done, and just as he got to the brook that separates Deep Meadows West from Deep Meadows Central, he had a good idea that made him laugh. He laughed out loud and slapped his thigh, which made 2 boys who were sitting on the bridge railing without being seen laugh. One person said, "There's old John going home after seeing Ivy Summers. I don't know what on earth is making him laugh. I think I'd give up trying to find a wife if it took me 15 years to do so." But the speaker was a Hamilton, and Hamiltons never stuck with anything. Even though John was well off and owned a good farm, he didn't really have a home of his own. His older brother, who was married and had a family, owned the old Irwin farm. John lived with him, and he got used to it to the point where he didn't care. When you're 40, you can't waste time on love. That night, John pulled out the details, and the next day he started the campaign. But Ivy Summers didn't hear the news until the evening after that. Emily, who is her niece, told her. The latter had been talking with Sam Mitchell up the lane, and she came in with a big smile and twinkle in her eyes. "I guess you've lost your beau this time, Aunt Ivy. It looks like he was finally going to believe what you said." Ivy asked a little sharply, "What on earth do you mean?" She was in the pantry counting eggs when Emily came in. This made her lose track of how many eggs she had. "I don't remember if I said 6 or 7 dozen the last time. I'll have to start over and count them again. I wish you could think of something other than beaux all the time, Emily." "Well, but listen," Emily insisted in a mean way. Yesterday night, John Irwin went to the party at Cherry Valley with Harriet Warren. He took her there and drove her back home. Ivy said, "I don't believe it," before she even thought about it. She put an egg in the basket so quickly that it broke the shell. "Oh, that's right. Sam Mitchell told me about it. He was there and saw him. Sam says that he was dressed to kill, was smiling a lot, and followed Harriet around like her shadow. I guess he won't be a problem for you anymore, Aunt Ivy." Ivy got back to being calm as she picked out the broken egg from among the whole ones. She laughed in a careful way. "Well, we can only hope so. God knows he needs to try someone else. Go change your clothes for milking, Emily, and don't talk so much with Sam Mitchell up the lane. He was always a get-and-carry guy. Young girls shouldn't act like that." After Emily left, Ivy threw the broken eggshell out of the pantry window with a lot of force. "No one is as stupid as an old fool. John Irwin has always been stupid. He was going to go after Harriet Warren? He's old enough for her to be his daughter, and also a Warren. I've been around when an Irwin and a Warren wouldn't be seen on the same side of the road. Well, I don't care, and he shouldn't think I do. It'll be nice not to have to deal with him anymore." Ivy walked home alone from the prayer meeting the next night. It might have been a relief, but she felt very lonely. John didn't go there. The Warrens were Methodists, and Ivy was right when she guessed that he had gone to the Cherry Valley Methodist prayer meeting. "Dancing to Harriet's tune," she said to herself with disdain. When she got home, she took a closer look at her face in the mirror than she had in years. Ivy Summers had never been pretty. When she was young, people used to call her gawky. She was very tall and had a skinny, angular body. Her face was long and pale, and her hair was dark. Her eyes were beautiful. They were a shiny shade of hazel and were big with long lashes. They were still pretty, but the lines around her eyes were easy to see. Her mouth also had brackets, and her cheeks were hollow. Ivy realized all of a sudden, in a way she had never done before, that she was getting old and that her youth was long gone. She was an old maid, and Harriet Warren was young and pretty. Ivy's long, thin lips trembled all of a sudden. "I'm an even bigger fool than John," she said with anger. John did not go out on Saturday night. Where he usually sat on the big old-fashioned porch looked empty and lonely. Ivy was rude to Emily and abrupt with her cat. She was angry with herself. What did it matter if she never saw John Irwin again? Everyone knew that if she wanted to, she could have married him years ago. At nightfall, she saw a buggy go by her gate. Even from that far away, she could tell that Harriet Warren had a pretty, colorful face. John was driving his new buggy, which he had just bought. As they crept up the hill, the sun made the spokes of the wheels shine. Ivy may have had a little trouble seeing because of them. At any rate, she rubbed her hand over her eyes and quickly turned around and went upstairs. Emily was practicing her music lesson in the parlor below and singing in a sweet, shrill voice. In the yard, the hired men were laughing and talking. Ivy closed her window and slammed the door. Then she went to her room and laid down on her bed, saying her head hurt. People in Deep Meadows laughed and made jokes about Ivy, which she had to take with a smile because she had no reason to be mad at them. In reality, they hurt her pride too much to take. When John left, she realized she had no other close friends, and that nobody cared about her, and she was a very lonely woman. After 3 weeks, she met John and Harriet face to face one night. She and Emily were walking to church, but they were going the other way. John was driving his new buggy. His horse had a coat that looked like satin and crimson rosettes on his bridle. John was very well dressed, and his round, clean-shaven face and clear blue eyes made him look quite young. Harriet was sitting next to him in a proper and self-aware way. She was a very pretty girl with bold eyes who was a bit overdressed. She had on a big flowery hat and a white lace veil, and she smiled condescendingly at Ivy. Ivy thought that she was old and dowdy, and she was very pale. As they drove by, John lifted his hat and gave a friendly bow. Harriet laughed out loud. Ivy didn't turn around, but her face turned very dark. Did that girl make fun of her? She was so angry and hurt that she was shaking. When she got home that evening, she sat by her window for a long time. John had left, and he had let Harriet Warren make fun of her. He would never see her again. Well, it didn't matter anyway, but she was an idiot. Only she had never thought that John could act that way. She would only let herself think, if I had thought he would, I might not have been so harsh with him. After 4 weeks, John stopped by on a Saturday night. He was nervous and shaky, but he was good at hiding it. Ivy was taken by surprise. She didn't expect him to come back, so she wasn't ready. As she stood there in the dusk, he suddenly came around the corner of the porch, and she jumped. "Good evening, Ivy," he said with ease and no fear. Ivy started to cry. She was, or she thought she was, very angry. John didn't seem to notice that she wasn't happy. He sat down in his old spot in a calm way, and Ivy didn't know that his heart was pounding like a hammer. "I guess you're going to the bridge," she said in a cutting tone. "It's almost a waste of time for you to waste any more time here than you have been lately. Without a doubt, Harriet will be waiting for you." John's face lit up with happiness for a moment. He looked at Ivy with keen eyes, but she wasn't looking at him. Instead, she was staring straight out over the poppy beds. A jealous woman can always be found out. If Ivy didn't care about him, he would have seen it in her face. "I don't think she will," he said in a cool way. "I wasn't sure if I'd be down tonight or not, so I didn't say for sure. Since it's been so long since we've talked, I thought I'd stop by for a while. But if I'm not wanted, I can go wherever I want." Ivy could not get control of herself again. She would have said that her nerves were all strung up. She felt like she was about to cause a scene, but she couldn't stop herself. She said in a stony voice, "I guess it doesn't matter much what I want. At least it hasn't seemed like that recently. Of course you don't care. Oh no, all you care about is Harriet Warren. Well, I hope you have fun with her." John looked, or pretended to look, confused. In fact, he was just happy his plan was working. "I just don't get you, Ivy," he said with a little hesitation. "Something seems to be bothering you." "I? No, Mr. Irwin, I'm not. Old friends don't matter anymore, of course. Well, I'm sure that new ones will last just as long." "If it has to do with me seeing Harriet," John said with ease, "I don't see how it could be important to you. You went to a lot of trouble to show me that you didn't want me. I don't blame you. A woman has a right to do what she wants, and a man should be smart enough to take his answer and move on. I hadn't, which is where I went wrong. I don't want to bother you anymore, but I think we could be really good friends. I'm sure I'm still your friend just as much as I was before." Now, I think that John's speech, which he gave in a calm, matter-of-fact way, as if he was making a case with no bias, was a masterpiece. It was the last well-thought-out move of the whole campaign. If it didn't get her to give up, he was a defeated man. But it wasn't a failure. Ivy was so excited that she had reached the point where a woman must either go crazy or cry. Ivy was sad. She sat down flat on a chair and started crying. John's hat and cane went in different directions. John jumped across the space between them and landed in the chair next to Ivy. He grabbed her hand and put his arm around her waist in a bold move. "Ivy, what the heck? Do you really care? Just tell me." "I guess it doesn't matter to you if I do," Ivy sobbed. "It hasn't seemed to make a difference anyway." "Ivy, look here. Didn't I try to find you for 15 years? I've always wanted you, and I still do if I can get you. I could care less about Harriet Warren or anyone else than you. Now, you tell the truth, Ivy." Ivy was sure it was, and there was no doubt about it, but she had to cry, and she did it on John's shoulder. It made her feel so much better. Later, as Emily quietly climbed the stairs at dusk, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. When she regained her composure, she turned and ran around the house in panic. She ran into Sam Mitchell, who was coming across the yard from meeting with the hired men at dusk. "What's wrong with you, Em? You look as if you'd seen a ghost." Emily laughed out loud and leaned against the fence. "Oh, Sam," she said with a gasp. "Old John Irwin and Aunt Ivy are sitting on the front porch in the dark, and he was kissing her. And they never saw or heard me. It was as if they were deaf and blind." Sam let out a huge whistle and then burst out laughing so loudly that it could be heard on the dark front porch and in the ears of the lovers. But they didn't know he was laughing at them, and even if they had, it wouldn't have mattered. They were too happy to have cared. In the fall of that year, Ivy Summers got married. When she was safe with him, John told her everything, and she forgave him. "But it was kind of mean for you to go with Harriet, get people talking about her, and then leave her as you did," said Ivy. "Don't you agree, John?" Her husband's eyes twinkled. "Well, not even close. See, Harriet is going to get married to that Johnson guy out west. Not many people know this, but I did, which is why I picked her. Even though I was old, I thought it was likely that she'd be willing to flirt with me for a little fun. Harriet's just that kind of girl, and I decided if that didn't work, nothing would, and I would just give up for good. But it did, didn't it, Ivy?" "I should say so. It was awful of you, John, but I guess it's a good thing you did, because I wouldn't have known I couldn't live without you otherwise. I feel dreadful. Emily could tell you that I was just as mad as anything. John, what made you think of it?" John said in a wise way, "A man had to do something, and I would have done almost anything to get you, Ivy." And there it was. We had been dating for 15 years, but we had nothing to show for it. I don't know why I thought of it, though. I guess it was just a good idea. Anyway, I have you, which is what I set out to do in the first place. I hope you enjoyed my story. I hope that the sound of my voice and the crackling fire have helped you drift off into a calm state of relaxation. Spend some extra time now listening to the fire and drifting off to a peaceful, deep sleep.